We want to welcome you to the Customer Success webinar series brought to you by ClientSuccess. We are broadcasting live from the base of the beautiful mountains in Silicon Slopes, Utah. I am Burke Alder, Vice President of Marketing and a Customer Success Strategist at ClientSuccess, and want to give a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us from all over the world. ClientSuccess is a customer success management platform that helps leaders and CSMs like you retain and grow your customer base. We do this through real-time customer insights, communication, and collaboration across the customer journey or life cycle. During today's webinar, we will hear from Jamey Jeff, Managing Director of Customer Success Solutions of Costal Cloud. It's really exciting because Jamey is a former Chief Customer Officer with over 20 years of experience in your shoes as a client service executive. He will be covering 5 standout strategies of top-performing customer success teams from a recent in-depth study that they have launched called the 2018 Customer Success Industry Report. Today's webinar is designed to be a collaborative session. We encourage you to use the Q&A functionality that's found at the bottom of the webinar. Jamey and I will be answering questions during the presentation, and you can, as you have those questions, you can just feel free to answer those and ask those in the Q&A. There will be actually a dedicated time at the end of the presentation. But with that, let's get started. It's my pleasure to welcome Jamey Jeff. Jamey, we're excited to have you here with us today, and the thousands of other customer success executives and leaders and managers all over the world. Welcome, Jamey.
Thanks, Burke. Great to be here, and thanks everyone for joining today. Very much looking forward to having a good session, and as Burke said, encourage you to participate as we go with any sorts of questions that you have. So to kick things off, I'll give you just a real brief overview of Costal Cloud. We're a business and technology consulting firm, a little over 5.5 years old. We've had the pleasure and the privilege of working with over 375 clients, delivered over 1,300 engagements. Our team is just north of about 140 folks across the U.S. We're all onshore. And within our customer success consulting practice, our team is made up of former operators. So I like to say that we are not, quote, just consultants, but like myself as a former 2-time Chief Customer Officer, we have a team made up of former VPs and directors of customer success, former CSMs, former account managers, folks who have been in your seats, in your shoes, and fought the good fight with the sorts of challenges that we're all facing within our practices. And so, you know, one of the stats that we're most proud about is with our client relationships, that about 70% of our work is with repeat clients where we've had successful engagements, and they've continued to partner with us on their business and technology challenges. We're also a Salesforce Platinum consulting partner and have deep expertise across the entire Salesforce stack. So as Burke mentioned, we recently published the 2018 Customer Success Industry Report. And this was an in-depth analysis that we conducted by working with about 4 dozen customer success leaders across the country. And this study was a little bit unique in that we conducted it via in-depth interviews. Each discussion, on average, was about 60 minutes. And the key there, which you'll find as we go through some of the findings here, was to really get at the spirit and the story behind the data that we are gathering, right? So compared to maybe an email-based survey, what we were able to do through those conversations was to really dig in to the how and the why and the what behind the findings that we had. And I'll share some of that with you as we dig in. Our intent and our results with the participants who we spoke with was to really represent a good degree of breadth. So you'll see the companies where these folks came from ranged in size from those that were just over $1 million in ARR to those, the largest being just over $3 billion. So we really wanted to understand, full spectrum of the sorts of challenges and how they vary based on how big the company is in terms of revenue, head count, logo count, et cetera. So I encourage everyone, if you haven't already had the opportunity to download the full report. There's a lot more detail than what we'll be able to go to today. And Burke, will we be able to send out a link as well with the follow-up?
Yep, that will come when they get the recorded version of this. Yes, we'll send your link with the report. Thanks.
Perfect. So what we're going to go through today is we're really going to hit on some of the top 5 findings from the study where we found differentiated strategies that drove the most significant impact on the results that these companies' customer success programs were able to drive. And I'll hit upon them, just summarize them real quickly here. And you all can obviously read along as I'm going here. But, first and foremost was a focus on measuring customer outcomes. What are the results that we're able to deliver for those customers? Second is an investment in the professional development and training of CS teams and resources. On the whole, there's a significant underinvestment in this area, but for companies that do invest, there is a material difference in their performance. Leadership does play or make an impact on cross-company alignments as well as performance results. And this that topic actually may be one of the ones that sparks a lot of questions and opinions. The next point is around culture, that there's a big difference between companies that view the entire company as being responsible for the success of their customers versus expecting customer success just to be driven by the team that has that title. And lastly, on the financial side, that companies that really think of customer success as a growth engine, not just a cost center, have much greater performance and results as well. So we're going to dive in here, and starting first things first, you'll see as we go here that the pattern that'll follow is we're going to start off each section with a quote from one of the participants that really kind of captured the spirit of our conversations around that topic. And I imagine that many of the folks on the call will appreciate this first comment here around measuring customer outcomes is the bane of my existence, said one of our participants. And that was a common feeling that this is hard to do. And we all know from reading thought leadership and from consuming blogs and so on that we should be striving to measure customer outcomes, but not every company is effective at it. And as you see kind of the later part of the quote here, many times this is driven in a siloed way, right? Where the customer success team is taking up the charge, but it's possible in some cases our sales counterparts haven't set the expectation, or they themselves haven't had this sort of dialogue, and then we end up confusing customers because we start talking about new things during onboarding. What we found though is this really matters. So on the left-hand side, you can see the results of the question we asked around asking if companies are measuring customer outcomes. And what's interesting is only about 50% of the companies that we spoke to are measuring customer outcomes, or even see it as part of their primary charter, or the primary responsibility of their customer success teams. But regardless of how you measure retention, you can see that whether it's logo, gross dollar, or net dollar, but simply the companies that do measure the outcomes that they're able to drive result in better retention results. And interestingly, we found this sort of staircase pattern amongst the different sizes of the companies that we spoke to, where the larger they were, the more likely they were, or the greater percentage of the participants in those buckets were to measure customer outcomes. Now, I certainly don't have the data to say whether it's causal, but given the correlation here, what I would suggest is there's a bit of this pattern where as you get bigger, this is something you need to be doing, right? And certainly as companies become larger and later stage, it's a practice that their customers will increasingly demand of them. So continuing here, I want to highlight and drill down a little bit into some of the common challenges by way of sharing some of the best practices that came out of our study. And so one of the common ones, I'm sure there's some folks on the call here today who could relate, is not every product or service makes it easy to measure customer outcomes. And what I mean by that is there's not always a direct financial ROI that can be calculated in a simple manner. Or some companies just have a hard time getting started, right? They say, look, I don't have an easy spreadsheet that will build the business case, if you will. So what we found was in some cases, as a first things first sort of approach, some of our participants start by measuring customer sophistication. And what we mean by that is where they weren't able to or weren't yet measuring the direct ROI of their product. They're measuring things like helping their customers get better or move up in terms of things like best practices or using higher value features of their product. So you kind of think about moving your customers along this progression from a beginner to a novice to an expert. And they focused on measuring their effectiveness in driving their customers up that curve. The second thing that often stood out, and I kind of touched upon this with the customer challenge in this area, was around really partnering with sales in the production of success plans. So I define a success plan as something that runs in parallel to your technical implementation plan. So this is not about the integration and configuration steps. These are about the steps that you work with in conjunction with your customer towards proving and validating their business case. And so it's really important to start those conversations during the sales process so that your customer is sharing and is aligned that, hey, by buying this product, we're expecting to increase revenue, cut costs, drive efficiencies, etc. And so leveraging the success plan really helps early on to center the conversation with the customer around the results that they're trying to achieve, not just the product features that they are seeking to use or that you think that they should use. The last point I'll hit upon here, I'll sometimes refer to this as a bit of a kind of measuring the measurement. Some of the best companies in our study went even further where as a first step, they were able to measure the outcomes or the value that they were delivering to their customers. But they had a second or a higher level measurement, which was they measured the percent of their customer base for which they had a confirmed or verified ROI statement, if you will, from their customer, and particularly from the economic buyer of their product. And this doesn't mean that they had a public case study. Those can take a lot of time and approvals to get done. But rather they had driven the conversation to the point where in their dialogue with the customer, they said, look, we think that we've saved you $1 million a year. And their customer echoed back and said, yes, I agree with that. And so by by taking it to that kind of two-step point with their measurement, they're able to do a couple things. One, they were forcing their teams to have a way of measuring customer value, but they're also ensuring that they are directly having that conversation with the customer and getting the confirmation from them that they were meeting their desired and expected outcomes. Do you have any questions so far on this first point?
No, one of the things, I appreciate you bringing that up, just barely talking about the outcomes of the features and the solutions and the platforms and the technology people have purchased towards ROI. When I did ask a question to everyone in the audience, I said, what are the types of outcomes they're measuring? And here were some of the responses from the audience, and maybe you can talk a little bit about those, but usage of purchase licenses, logins to software platform, that was an outcome. Time and therefore dollars saved by automating a previous manual process. And I like that outcome because it's tied back to your statement of ROI. There was a few on these: product adoption, usage of features. So when you think about, and for the audience, if you can explain this a little bit more, Jamey, with your experience, and how do they, a lot of the times we're like, hey, if they're using this product, that's an outcome. So is there a difference between product usage versus outcomes, or do you see those as the same thing?
Yeah, great question. I like to use DocuSign as an example when I talk about this topic around usage versus outcomes, and also a way to think about success plans as well. So everyone's generally familiar with what DocuSign does. They help us, electronically sign for contracts and whatnot that previously was done with pen and paper, right? And so, I imagine as part of DocuSign sales and onboarding process, there's a discussion around with a customer that says, hey, look, I'm the customer. I've got 10,000 paper signatures per year that I want to replace with electronic signatures, right? And that's going to save me X dollars through just operational inefficiency plus delays and so on. And so if I'm onboarding a customer as a DocuSign CSM, I'm defining my success plan not around have I given them a login to log into DocuSign. And I'm not even looking just to see are their signatures happening, but rather I'm doing that in a structured way to drive toward, I know that I've got that goal of 10,000 signatures to replace per year. Well, what's the first 100? Maybe I'm going to start in the first 100 signatures. We're going to replace all new hire onboarding paperwork, right? Where you start a new job and you got to sign your confidentiality agreement and all the stuff that we do on day one at a new company. Maybe I'm going to set up that success plan with the customer to say, first thing we're going to do, we're going to replace your new hire agreement. Then after that, we're going to replace all of your external vendor contracts. Then we're going to replace all the paper signatures for your leases and your facilities, et cetera. So what we're doing through that success plan is really driving towards, we're going to go from 100 to 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. And that's really the basis for the success plan, is driving towards validating that business case. And so that first 100, right, that becomes our first value, that we've demonstrated that our product has achieved a business milestone and a business outcome that is why the customer bought. So I might see a ton of usage and login activity, but I'm still not feeling complete in terms of accomplishing those success criteria until I'm hitting those agreed upon value milestones.
Yeah, great thought. Yeah, there's been a lot of chat in the group right now talking about this, just different ways of measuring outputs versus outcomes, and so yeah, tying that back, I think to one, I think we learn a lot in customer success is to really understand what the customer needs. I know we try to drive adoption or outcomes from our side, which would be retention and renewal or growth, but really to have that customer focus of changing behavior of the client, changing process with the client, and then of course helping them achieve their goals that they set out when they first purchased. And then how long does it take us to achieve those outcomes? So, but yeah, great thoughts. I think we can move on to your next topic. People are excited about. Keep on chatting in the window. Love the chats. At the very end, Jamey will provide his information if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask. But I appreciate all the questions we've had so far.
Great. So continuing along, I imagine that this point will resonate with a lot of the folks on the phone as well, which is around the way that we train our resources. And I think, there's an interesting point here where sales training is very common in the market, and sales professionals come to a new job expecting to have regular training and sound development. And we could all probably rattle off 5 different sales training methodologies out there in the market. But the big unfortunate thing is with our CS teams that a lot of companies just kind of throw folks into the deep end, right? And in many cases, the best case is we onboard them, we give them a little bit of, okay, here's the standard new employee onboarding. We'll teach you when you're going to get your paycheck and how to find a bathroom. But then otherwise, it's okay, go kind of figure it out. And we really do CS teams a disservice there because this is not an easy job. And what really stands out, which was really interesting and quite surprising actually, is this stark performance difference when we ask companies to rate the maturity of their CS professional development programs on a scale of 1 to 5, that those that assess their programs as a 4 or a 5 have such a significant difference in net dollar retention than those that gave themselves a 1, 2, or a 3. And when you put this simply, it's not surprising if you abstract this out from CS and look at it more generally, that gosh, go figure that people who are better trained to do their job, in fact, do their job better and perform better than those who don't have sufficient training. And so, what we really saw that stood out as common facets of companies that are doing a good job around training and developing their resources is there's these 4 key aspects to their CS development programs. First, there's a lot of, early on in particular, a lot of riding shotgun and working with folks who are already trained in the role to understand the customer life cycle, to understand, obviously, the company's product and how to respond to common customer challenges, et cetera. They also, in addition to that, learn by doing, are structured and have a regular cadence around formal training and for key skills. And one of the key skills, actually, where we saw a lot of alignment for the higher performing organizations was actually having CS folks going through sales training as well. There's a good deal of sales within our roles as CS professionals, of course. The third point was around industry and CS best practice education. So that includes going to CS conferences, taking CS training, really kind of driving our sophistication of our practices deeper and more broadly. And then regular structured feedback and coaching was the 4th point. So having managers that are sitting in on calls, participating in quarterly business reviews, and not from a hey, we're bringing someone senior to this call, but often kind of quietly listening in to be able to give that coaching to that CSM to say, hey, you handled this part well. This other part you could have done a little bit better. And any questions out there that we have coming in from folks around professional development? If not, I'll continue to the next point then.
Oh, sorry. One question we had out there from the audience. Kelly asked, talking about CS training specifically, what do you recommend? I know you talked about some conferences, but is there, when you sit down and say, hey, how do I train my team? What would you recommend? Do they get together and talk? Do they do real life scenarios? What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah. I've seen it done a few different ways. One is, and obviously depends on where you are today and some, it depends aspect of your company and your product, and also the engagement strategy of your CS team. If you're high touch, mid touch, tech touch, all of those things drive different sorts of training needs. And so, if it's, I'd say look for opportunities where if your sales team is having training around a specific sales methodology that team is using, say, challenger sales, spin selling, et cetera. If you have someone who's coming in to do that, I'd encourage you to conduct that training. A lighter weight method, aside from stuff like going to conferences, would also be, in a prior company, we selected specific books that were relevant to the CS roles. And we had senior CSMs who would read those books and distill them down into 3 key takeaways relevant to the team. And then those senior CSMs led the training of the more junior CSMs in going through educating them on those 3 key points and kind of the tailored or applicability to our company and the role. And so that's a lower cost approach that you can take as well if you don't have the budget to send the whole team out. That also becomes a way to help develop the leadership skills in your more senior folks by having them prepare that sort of educational offering within the company. And then there's a number of organizations and growing every day that offer tailored CS training in the market as well. Some of it online and virtual, some of it on site and face-to-face. So
I think, yeah, great thoughts on that. I think one thing I love to do also, if you're trying to think about how do you, get things to start seeing improvements on trainings, is write down for each one of the roles that you have in your CS organization, the skills related to those roles. That could be negotiations, a huge part of that. That could be communication. Whatever those skills are that you feel like drive a successful CSM, and then see where your team is on each of those core skills. Because then I think you can figure out, hey, let's talk a little about communication. Let's talk a little bit about negotiation. Then you can apply those principles like Jamey talked about of reading spin selling for negotiation, or actually value, for helping discuss value with clients. But I love that concept of taking a step back, get a whiteboard, write down the skills that are related to your team to be successful, and then start measuring growth on those skills. And then I think you'll see those outcomes of people feeling like they're having support from their team. So good thoughts.
Awesome.
Oh, wait, there's one more question, but I'm going to wait for the Q&A on that. So I appreciate all the thoughts. You guys are doing great. Keep the questions coming.
Good. All right. So we're going to move then into management and leadership. And this is the one that I think could spark some opinions and debate. So one of the questions that we asked our participants was, where does CS report in the organization? And generally the answers fell into one of 3 buckets. The CS reports directly to the CEO. CS reports to the COO, or CS reports to the head of sales or a chief revenue officer role. And what we found amongst our participants is, there's a little bit over half that report to the CEO. We in fact found the best net dollar retention results amongst those that reported to the head of sales. And we also as a related interesting data point, when we kind of ran the correlation between professional development and who those teams report to, we found that organizations that report to the head of sales also gave themselves the strongest average grades on the amount of CS professional development that they were doing. So this is an interesting one because I was talking with a client recently and they were asking, well, where should CS report? And I said, look, and we talked about the data here where, the reporting to sales, we found better net dollar retention. But this is a hard one, right? Because if I was being asked that question, and if I were returning to industry from a consulting role as a CCO again, personally, I'd say I want to report to the CEO, right? That I want that role parity and that quote unquote seat at the table. So this is a hard one. But what I think is the so what about this data is two things. Number one, the companies that report to the head of sales, as you see the higher net dollar retention rates there, I think it naturally drives a growth mindset within those CS organizations that their leadership is sales leadership, and they are not going to simply be satisfied just with retention or not losing. They're going to have more of a focus on growth. Two, I think another important aspect, we're not digging into the data on this in this discussion, but we talked a lot with our participants about alignment between the CS and sales teams. I think CS reporting in the head of sales drives very strong alignment, right? It eliminates the use of the word they. There's a lot less blaming that will be tolerated between CS and sales teams when they all report to the same leader, because hey, we're one big team. And lastly, as we touched upon, that tendency towards professional development within sales cultures, we see that carry over into organizations, CS organizations that are led by sales leaders. And so as a result, the CS teams tend to get more and better professional development. And then again, people who are better trained perform better in their jobs. Any comments or questions on this one?
I think, a lot of people, when they hear that stat, they're probably like, wow, it'd be interesting if we could kick up a survey real quick and ask, how many people do actually report to the head of sales or CEO. I know if you're, like you mentioned, if you're the chief customer officer, you'd want to really have your direct inline focus to the CEO, especially as a chief customer officer in the executive team. But from thoughts around, it's interesting. I wonder what people thought when they first said that the better net retention. I wonder if that's the skills. What do you think? Is it the skills related behind that? Is it just the alignment? Can a customer success team that does report to the CEO have greater net dollar retention by collaborating better or aligning better with sales?
Well, I think it's hard to kind of separate it out into, just one or two things. But I think it's a couple things. When you think about how CS teams are incentivized or compensated, right? That I'd expect that a much greater number of those teams are compensated not simply on retaining their customers, but on helping to grow those relationships. Or even if that's not a direct responsibility of the CS team, if it's, say, separated between a CS and an account management role, the expectation there is that, hey, you guys are working together to grow this account. We're focused on growth, not focused on not losing the customer, right?
Yeah.
And then I think that because of that being the mission or the priority of the collective team, then naturally that's where the professional development comes in, is that we're teaching and training and coaching all of these folks to drive growth, right? That it just starts to reinforce itself some more. But the answer, candidly, is in terms of like, well, what's right, depends on the company, right? It really depends on what the company's strengths are. It depends on, obviously, the individuals of who these leaders are at a given company and what their backgrounds are. And likewise, what are some of the biggest challenges, right? If you've got a big logo retention issue, or even a gross dollar retention issue, in many cases, first things first, you gotta stem the bleeding, because the bigger your gross dollar churn issue is, the harder it is, obviously, to offset that with healthy net dollar retention. So like most hard questions in life, the answer often starts with it depends. I certainly wouldn't conclude from this data that this is the one and only right answer for every company.
Great thoughts there. We've talked to thousands of SaaS companies, and we see it about 50% of the time. They either report to the CEO or I'm hearing a lot of people say they're reporting to even like a chief revenue officer who manages both customer success. And I think one of the bigger questions, if we take a step up from that, and that even we've seen a few people chat about, is it a cost center, my focus, or is it a profit center? And how do I show executives whatever I'm focused on, whether that be adoption of a client, I'm driving value, I'm in the middle kind of, and then I identify expansion opportunities, to not just be seen as that cost center, but to be able to be seen with KPIs or dollars, that you really are a profit center. I do believe customer success is the strategy as a company. It's not just a role. And successful companies with retention are going to scale quicker to profitability in the long run and value. Referrals from clients, brand development. I mean, if you're always having to fill the back end of your funnel with new people on the top, it's really hard to build a very awesome brand generated company. So, but we'll probably have to do another webinar on that, cost center versus profit center, because I know you have two more points that you want to bring onto this webinar, but that's just something I'm hearing people bring up. Cost center, profit center. Where can I find my value, even if I'm reporting to sales or a CEO?
Yes, and actually we will hit upon that point as the final point here. So we will be able to talk about it a bit today. But you made a comment a second ago, which gives a good segue into the next point here, which is around kind of who owns the success of the customers. And here's some of the common pain points we heard where this isn't working well, where being customer centric is really viewed as lip service, and at the end of the day, the leadership team didn't really buy into it, right? Or we've all seen, maybe some of us are part of those companies where customer success's role is viewed as, quote, fixing churn, right? And I just cringe when I hear that, right? Because, it's not up to customer success alone. And so we asked this question. We asked our participants on a 5-point scale how customer success was viewed within their companies, where we said a 1 was that cringeworthy sort of culture where the success of your customers is viewed as the responsibility of the CS team. And in those instances, basically, if there was a churn problem, the response will be, well, you guys are the ones who report on churn. So if there's a churn problem, it must be your fault, right? The flip side, the 5 on that 1 to 5 point scale, given that same scenario of there being a churn problem, the company viewed it as, no, churn is a measure of the sum of the parts, right? So causes of churn, with churn being a symptom, could be, is marketing bringing in the right leads? Is sales selling good deals? Do we have product market fit? And is CS effective at guiding the customer journey towards delivering those outcomes, right? But we're all in this together. This is not, the success of our customers is not the role of the CS team alone. And so, like some of the earlier points, again, we found a difference of about 2 points in net dollar retention rate amongst the companies that gave themselves a 4 or a 5 around that culture of embracing the success of customers being the responsibility of the whole company, versus those that graded themselves a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And so this was, there's a couple best practices that came out of this as well. First, obviously, this starts at the top, right? That it can't just be the VP of CS who is saying this stuff. These sorts of statements need to come from every senior leader at the company, and certainly the CEO. One of our participants gave a great example here, where at their annual kickoff, their CEO stood up in front of the company and she made a very clear point. She said, every single employee sitting here is a customer success manager. Every single one of you is responsible for the success of our customers. And hearing from the CEO, that matters. That makes a difference. And where you see that materialize at the better performing companies is the second point here, that every team has KPIs that drive back towards customer retention, customer success, customer outcomes, customer growth, right? That KPIs are not designed or developed in a way that only thinks of where you sit in your silo, but on that kind of bottom line, how does this trace back to the success of our customers and our customers' outcomes? And there's also a bit of a process aspect to it too. And this third point, one of our participants said, we went through the exercise and went kind of role by role within the company. And clearly we asked and we clearly articulated answers to this question of how do you contribute to the success of the customers? How do you drive a positive customer experience? And they went through, and not just CS, not just sales and account management, but they said it to finance, right? And so you think about those sorts of touch points that can really erode at the customer experience where, maybe the product is effective, but then, gosh, every time I get an invoice, it's wrong. Or if I have to change something, I've got to talk to 10 different people in the accounting organization, and it's just a nightmare. And oh my gosh, like I now had 17 phone calls to deal with this invoice error, right? And so the companies that do this really well, they really view this as truly a team effort, where every single person at the company has a part in this.
That's great. I once I had a mentor, and I'm in marketing, so run marketing here at ClientSuccess, and a great mentor of mine said, "Hey, Burke, do you know that you influence churn?" And I go, "What? No, that's sales, or that's customer success." And I started really thinking about how I could do better And so we started putting in lead scoring to try to get our ideal customer profile, so that we would score a lead. And we saw that by scoring leads at the first of it, we would see that sales could close more of the more aligned leads we had, and that satisfaction when it moved with that score all the way to customer success was better. So it's interesting when you talk about every team has a KPI that drives retention. Even marketing, you're like, well, they're so far removed, but actually we are very much a part of what are the campaigns, what are the messages we bring. That message is then translated to sales. And another thing we did that was very helpful is we would have a sales handoff score. So the sales team, now they have a lead score. Now they have a sales handoff score. We can see how well did they sell this, so that when it comes over to customer success and they start doing adoption and onboarding, it's very easy for us to be aligned with our value we deliver and outcomes we deliver to our customers and the results. And the customers, as we've improved those touch points, like your research, those 2 points, or 2 percentage points increase, we've seen even more growth and success because of that focus as a team, versus sometimes it's like, hey, you guys are in charge of churn and customer success. You got to have great alignment with product also. So these are great thoughts, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just add another anecdote from that point you just shared around marketing and sales and in the collective ownership. One of our participants made this comment, which I think speaks to a very healthy example of the way this works, in that they've gotten very scientific in a similar way of lead scoring and deal scoring, and they were scoring the fit of the customer both during the sales cycle, but then they'd score it by the CS team as that customer was transitioned. And they said, this person said, look, we have gotten off the churn hamster wheel, so to speak, in terms of we do not throw resources at saving bad fit customers, right? And so if a customer comes through that they find to be a bad fit, they'll do their standard enablement and onboarding around them. But what they don't do is what many of us find ourselves in, a situation of running these aggressive save plays, right? And to their credits, what they've recognized is that you're much better off investing those sorts of resources earlier in the life cycle, right? Like not letting bad fit customers through if you know that they're not going to be successful, or B, investing the resources earlier in your onboarding processes to make sure that customers right out of the gate are as successful as possible. Because what typically happens, there's like a first and second order effect when we try to save customers. We throw all this time and money to try to prevent the loss, but then in doing so, we often make a lot of extra promises and commitments, right? To say, oh, don't leave. We'll do all this extra stuff, whether it's we discount or we give you free time and capacity, what have you. And so it really kind of compounds this ongoing hamster wheel effect to try to make those saves, where this company looked at it and said, look, if there's something about our business or our processes that are broken, invest that time upfront so that this doesn't happen again, rather than trying to stem the bleeding on the back end.
Great thoughts. And I love all the chats that's going on in the chat window. I appreciate, I'll try to download this chat and include that in the communication, just so you can keep the conversation going. But thanks a lot. I guess you can move on to your final point. But
yeah. So the final point you mentioned a moment ago is around budgeting for customer success, and really how customer success is thought of financially within the organization. And so it is incredibly common. I'll show you the data in just a second. But I think we really, as an industry, do ourselves a disservice in the way that we talk about building and scaling our teams, right? And you see the quote here. It's just like, well, we got more accounts, we need more people, right? And so what we found is the vast majority of the companies that we spoke with allocate headcount, which is by far the biggest CS expense, based on some sort of logo ratio. You know, you get 50 accounts per CSM. Second after that was ARR ratios, right? We've all heard of the magic number of $2 million in ARR per CSM. The ad hoc ones are really just kind of winging it. But any of those top three, you know, I think that we are just reinforcing keeping ourselves as being viewed as a cost center, right? That we're budgeting in a way that is similar to how like server and compute capacity is budgeted, right? Like the more customers we need, the more virtual machines we need, right? And that is purely a cost, and it's a linear cost that grows as the company grows. And what's really important is this final category that of companies that are budgeting and shifting the conversation about customer success to be one that is percent of revenue based. And you think in terms of metrics that are akin to customer acquisition costs, but customer retention costs as a first standpoint, but then the output or the ROI of those investments. And that'll kind of drive towards the final point. And I'll talk through one of our participants that makes a really great example of this, what they were able to model as they were evolving their customer success organization and strategy. They took a very test-driven approach to how they did it. And so they focused their CS efforts on a subset of their customer base. And they were then able to compare and contrast the effect and the impact that CS had on their performance by way of growth and net retention. And so that dialogue then shifted from, I need more CSMs because we have more customers, to, look, on this cohort of customers where we applied this more robust CS strategy, we had gross dollar retention and net dollar retention that were both higher than in, call it the control group. And so what that led to was a conversation where the CFO actually turned back around. And many of us, have certainly been in that position of having we'll just call it a discussion with our finance organization, looking for additional headcount where we are trying to make the case. But in this situation, the ask was in the opposite direction. And the CFO came to the head of CS and said, hey, look, if I increase the investment of budget that I give to you within the CS organization, what is the additional return that you can generate in terms of improved net and gross dollar retention? And so it's very much the way that we look at any sort of investment of, look, I'm going to put $1 in and I expect more than $1 out, right? That this is going to grow financially by making an investment here. And so as we work to change the nature of the dialogue, this is the kind of closing point, that if you take no other action coming out of this webinar today, really focus here on articulating the impact that your teams are having on the financial performance of the company, to help articulate and get that buy-in to why you're here, right? Don't leave yourselves as viewed as just a cost center that just keeps adding people. Really turn the dialogue into one where the company views your impact as $1 in turns into more than $1 out.
I think those are great thoughts. It's, you know, breaking it down. What is your company focus? I know a lot of times when you think about giving advice and applying advice across an organization, and you probably see this as in Costal Cloud as you do consultation efforts with customer success. It's really about quickly understanding, you know, what are the current processes that are flowing through the company? We talk about that as process. Then what are the people it's influencing? How are they measured? That's people. And then what's the, you know, you got process, technology, people. Am I forgetting the third one? But this is, I think, an important point is to step back in your organization, see where you are with customer success. Do you have your processes defined? Do you have KPIs? Are those KPIs outside of your organization? Are you training your customer success teams, like you mentioned earlier? Are we going for outcomes? There's such good content we've discussed today, so I appreciate the time we've talked about.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got, I'm going to flip to the next slide just so I've got my contact info up here. If folks have further questions, would certainly encourage them to reach out and email me. Obviously, you know, download the full report to get all the details, but we can leave this here up on the screen for a couple minutes if there's a few more questions before we close, Bert.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's some great ones. We talk about, you know, a customer, you know, we talked earlier about having a client that may be a bad fit. And I'm going to tie this back to a conversation we had, you know, 15, 20 minutes ago about reporting to sales. How would they approach sales? Or if you're reporting to, you know, the chief sales officer or the VP of sales, and you keep on telling them, hey, those are bad fit. We can't have a lot of attention for them. What would your advice be in that scenario for someone who they are maybe reporting to sales, but sales is like, you know what, Burke, what we really care about is sales. And so we're going to keep, you know, that's a scenario someone mentioned here. What would you recommend?
Yeah, great question. That discussion very much has to be an adult conversation. And what I mean by that is everyone in that really has to own and understand their role. And when I wouldn't have that conversation just with CS and sales, I'd include marketing and product in it, because it's essential that as you think about defining a bad fit customer, that you do so in a way that all four of those teams define it the same way for the same reasons, right? That product, you know, and you know, however you do that, if you do that through personas or buyer types or jobs to be done, et cetera, product needs to be in alignment to make sure that they are building products and features for a specific customer and a specific customer problem that in an intentional way, as well as possible, solves that problem, right? And sales needs to really lean in to selling customers who have those types of problems, right? And marketing is focused on raising awareness of the solution with prospects who may have that problem as well, and then driving them through that buyer journey as you begin to engage with them. And CS, when they take the reins, needs to with those customers drive them towards maximum outputs and outcomes and results. The adult part that I think is really important for CS to recognize is, I think too often we can slip into a mode where there's kind of this implied suggestion that it's up to sales to make our job easy, right? And look, there are customers who are, they're not all the happy path customers, right? Not all of them have that sort of mindless onboarding that, man, we didn't really have to work that hard. It just clicked and they showed up to all of our calls and it was great, right? And so it's important, that's important for us to recognize heading into that conversation, that a bad fit customer is not one that was just challenging for us to onboard, say. We all have to recognize, like, a bad fit customer is one who the company as a whole and our products and our solutions is not able to make successful, right? And I would suggest go through that definition process before you're talking about a specific customer. Think through it in terms of personas and markets and segments and so on, so that you can do it, a bit outside the context of one specific situation, but really get agreement on who are we trying to sell to, who are we trying to help, and how do we think we can help them.
Awesome. Great thoughts there to close with. I appreciate everyone that's attended this webinar. I just saw a great chat that came through, said that some of the chatting has also been great for the content people have provided as you've been speaking. So I'll download these chats and send that out so we can use that as part of the learnings. But we appreciate everyone that's attended this webinar. We want to thank Jamey Jeff for taking time and focusing on this industry report, a lot of great insights. As you think about managing customers out there, we know it's a tough effort and it takes a lot of alignment. I mean, the core center is a customer, and to be successful as a company, you need to make them successful. So as we continue to evolve in customer success in this discipline, it's fun to be a part of. And based off of the chat and even the registrations we've got for this webinar, these topics are always moving and tending to improve. So one thing we have is we have a process you can participate in called Mentors. And it's a blog post that we ask you 6 questions. So a lot of you have provided great thoughts. There's some great thoughts from Tom I've seen today, and Maya, and just all these great people out there that are participating. But it allows you to answer 6 questions to give back to the community. Then we host those blogs, and it's called Mentors. So that's something you can be part of. You can go to clientsuccess.com/blog, and you'll see this green banner that says Mentors. We'd love to have you all participate. But Jamey, appreciate it for everything you've done. Thanks for your time. Everyone else, we'll see you next month for our Customer Success webinar series. Until then, Customer Success rocks. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.